I think people know that when they give money to the Scottish National Party, they're giving money to the cause of Scottish independence, and I think that's a pretty well-established point in people's psyche about how they donate to the SNP.
Hello and welcome to The Steamy, the Scotsman's politics podcast. Peter Murrell, the former SNP chief executive and Nicola Sturgeon's estranged husband, is a crook who embezzled more than £400,000 from the party over a 12-year period. But how did he get away with it? And what does the handling of this saga say about the SNP, the party of government in Scotland, and its financial transparency and governance arrangements? Those are the questions that many people in Scottish politics are now asking, with calls for an independent inquiry, perhaps a parliamentary inquiry, to shed some light on this whole sorry affair. Separately, but linked to this, John Swinney is now facing questions about the handling of a £600,000 ring-fenced independence referendum fund, which it turns out was simply spent on general SNP party business and campaigning. It's been another extraordinary week in Scottish politics, and to talk it all over, I'm joined by Catriona Stewart, the Scotsman's education correspondent, and by Andrew Quinn, the Scotsman's Westminster correspondent. Catriona, you were at court on Tuesday when we kind of got the full narrative being read out about Peter Murrell's crimes. It must have been quite something to see him being led into the courtroom in handcuffs.
It is a really strange experience seeing someone, not that you know, but someone that you are familiar with as a person, because of course we've all seen Peter Murrell at SNP conferences, we've seen him at various events. He is a backroom kind of guy, but to see him come into the dock handcuffed to the security guard, have to stand for the judge and then sit and listen as this litany of his crimes was read out to the court. He was quite impassive. You could see his face getting redder and redder the more information was shared with the court. But I think what struck me about it as well was a lot of it was just so banal. So you think he managed to perpetrate these crimes over 12 years, £400,000. We have rehearsed the list of things that he stole. And I think there was some sense that, not that he's a master criminal, but that this must have been quite a complex, complicated crime, when actually you're sitting there and you're listening to how he managed to do this. And it just is astonishing in its simplicity. He was able to claim back money without providing receipts. My jaw dropped when the prosecutors read out this line about how he just said that he wasn't able to use the SNP's digital expenses portal because he couldn't get logged into it. How was that allowed to fly? It's so bizarre and strange. And he was just using his charge card and then the charge card belonging to a couple of other staff members. So on one hand, it is this extraordinary situation that is grabbing the headlines. But on the other hand, it's just the definition of petty and banal and simple. It's just such an odd juxtaposition.
Yeah, I thought it was extraordinary that it emerged in court that there pretty much weren't any checks and balances on what Peter Murrell was doing. He was able to kind of falsify invoices, as you say, kind of bypass this internal system. There just doesn't seem to have been any checks on the stuff that he was putting through the system.
John Swinney had said that he had managed to circumvent their systems, but there didn't really seem to be anything for him to circumvent. It gave the impression that he was just very much doing whatever he wanted with the SNP finances and nobody was looking over his shoulder. And of course, that is about cult of personality politics. That is about a concentration of power at the heart of the SNP. He was married to the boss. Nobody wants to be challenging the boss's husband. And he had a veneer of credibility and respectability and trust for the very fact that he was so close to Nicola Sturgeon and she was trusted. So he was, to an extent, just hiding in plain sight and able to get away with this without anybody having alarm bells ringing. It is just completely astonishing.
Andrew, there are now calls for a parliamentary inquiry, with some suggesting that could be carried out in Westminster because John Swinney is refusing to consider it in Holyrood. How likely is it, though, that the Scottish Affairs Committee, for example, could push ahead with this? And would it even fall within their remit?
I think it could fall within the remit in part, and I spoke about this before, because the SNP have received so much public money and partly because they had so many MPs. So what was it? They had 56 MPs for a couple of years. They had over half of the Scottish MPs for 9 years. So that's meant they've accumulated millions of pounds of short money. So I think that will allow the Scottish Affairs Committee to look into it, even though the Scottish Affairs Committee is really meant to interrogate the Scotland office. I mean, I think the thing is as well, actually, they can kind of hold an inquiry on whatever they want as long as they agree. So what's going to happen is next week they have a private meeting on Tuesday, and look, almost all the MPs want an inquiry, partly because they're almost all not SNP MPs. Then we've got SNP Westminster leader Dave Duggan. He's the one nationalist MP on the committee. He's actually not said what he thinks yet. Now, I'm assuming he's opposed to it. In part, he's a big ally of Stephen Flynn, and Stephen Flynn's come out and said this week that he doesn't think there should be an inquiry. But I mean, I find it astonishing that he's not said anything, given he's actually come out and said this week that there should be an investigation into Douglas Alexander for his texts with Peter Mandelson, yet he can't comment on whether there should be an inquiry into his own party, which is much more of his business, really, let's be honest. And he's going to have a vote on it. Now, it's a really weird situation because usually the Scottish Affairs Committee, when they launch a probe, it's a unanimous decision. They kind of all agree on it, and that's almost definitely not going to be the case this time. And I think that probably makes a couple of people on the committee a little bit nervous about it. They don't necessarily want that. But I think also something which has reinforced some of the members to want that is we're seeing in Holyrood they're choosing the committees at the moment. And we're going to have the Public Audit Committee, and there's a fair chance that the SNP could have the deputy convener on that. Now, I think for a lot of the MPs, that alarm bells are ringing at that because they think an SNP person in a very senior role on a committee looking into the SNP's funds could basically just defend them the whole way. And they think that the Scottish Affairs Committee would at least be more transparent. Now, on the other side, the Scottish Affairs Committee, they've all got an axe to grind, don't they? They're anti-SNP politicians. So it's kind of hard to decide what you think's best. But I think an inquiry in Westminster will go ahead in part because the MPs who are on the committee are so determined to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an extent to which a parliamentary inquiry, particularly if it was held by the Scottish Affairs Committee, would be theatre. You know, there'd be Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney getting called as witnesses. It'd be broadcast, obviously. People could watch it. It would just be kind of extraordinary political theatre. But Catriona, it's also the case that, you know, there's so many unanswered questions here, particularly around party transparency, about the fact that people were raising concerns within the SNP as far back as 2019. We had those resignations from its National Executive Committee in 2021. Douglas Chapman, the former Treasurer, people like Joanna Cherry, the former SNP MP, both of them raising concerns about financial transparency at the time. So these alarm bells were ringing, but the leadership just chose not to hear them. And I think there's legitimate questions as to why that was and how this was allowed to happen. And I think John Swinney today, again, in First Minister's questions, saying that there's been this police investigation, this comprehensive police investigation that obviously found criminality in the case of Peter Murrell. And he's effectively saying, what more could we find out? But of course, that police investigation is not going to be concerned with internal party transparency and governance within the SNP.
John Swinney has obviously decided his lines. The party have decided the lines, and he is absolutely sticking to them. And I think to an extent, they hope that if they just bed down and ride this out, it will eventually just go away and it won't do them any kind of long-term harm. Much of what we know now, the public did know during the Holyrood election campaign. So we have had an electoral test in the middle of all of this brouhaha. Yes, it has really ignited people's imaginations now that we know the finer details of the purchases. But there is this huge issue of trust around what was done, what wasn't done, what checks and balances were in place, who knew what, when they knew it. And John Swinney's position is, well, that was then this is now. Yes, I've been around the party for the last couple of decades, but I've come in afresh. I've set up new checks and balances. I'm a new broom. I'm not sure how believable that is, but the SNP emphatically do not want an inquiry because they think that they can ride out this storm and it will quietly peter out. Whereas if they have an inquiry, exactly as Andrew says, as you say, it is going to be political theatre. It is going to, yet again, dominate the headlines. There are things that may come out that are fairly unsavoury and make things worse for the SNP. So there is no way that they are going to go with an inquiry at Holyrood. But one of the kind of side fallouts of all of this is that at the moment they're just not able to do anything without there being sceptical questions raised. So this afternoon we've had the committee conveners and deputy conveners signed off. We have the DeHont system in Holyrood. About half of the parliaments that we've had have had committee conveners and deputy conveners from the ruling party. It happened under Labour, it's happened multiple times under the SNP. It's not new. There are questions of governance around it, there are questions of scrutiny around it, but it is something that is pretty common. It happens. Whereas because there is all this questioning around the SNP finances and whether John Swinney is trustworthy, whether the party is trustworthy, there's a lot of chat today about, almost sort of real scepticism about the appointment of the committee conveners and almost sort of like conspiracy level chatter going on behind the scenes. And so you just wonder, at what point is the SNP going to say to itself, right, we have to do something to properly put this to bed, because they need to get on with the programme of government. They need to get on with just governing the country and trying to improve the everyday bread and butter issues that are mattering to people. And they're just not going to be able to do anything without this pall of suspicion being cast over them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think with the committee stuff today, I guess the point that the critics are making is particularly with the Finance Committee. It's one of the kind of major Holyrood committees, the SNP. As we speak, I think it's still to be formally voted on, but they're going to have the kind of convener and deputy convener roles in that committee. You've got people like former Green MSP Andy Whiteman. I saw the former Labour MSP Neil Frindlay kicking off about this on Twitter as well, saying how kind of that's not a sort of situation you want, particularly with the financial scrutiny on the government in the coming years. We've got this £5 billion black hole in kind of the public budget, but also just because in recent years we've had so much criticism that scrutiny in Holyrood is just not up to scratch. And this kind of situation with the SNP, basically having these key positions in the top committees, Public Service Reform Committee as well as another one they're going to hold the convener and the deputy convener role. That's the committee that's going to be overseeing cuts essentially to the kind of public sector. So it is kind of extraordinary when you think about it that way, considering Holyrood doesn't have obviously a second chamber in the way that Westminster does. So the committees really are the sort of checks and balances, and it's hard to see how that can properly be done in that sort of situation. But we should probably bring up the fact that this kind of £600,000 independence referendum fund, people might remember that the police investigation that uncovered Peter Murrell's crimes when it began in 2021, that was because of complaints that were made about the handling of two referendum campaign fundraisers in 2017 and 2019, which raised a combined £667,000. This was something we've had concerns about this raised in the Wings Over Scotland blog. It was part of the original police complaint that was made by the serial activist Sean Clerkin. The SNP insisted in 2017 that this money would only be used for the specific purpose of a referendum campaign. But John Swinney now admitting that it was actually used as part of the ongoing activities of the party. It was basically just spent in kind of general party business, including presumably campaigning. His point is that the SNP kind of exists to promote the cause of Scottish independence. So any money going towards it is de facto going towards campaigning for a second independence referendum or independence referendum campaigning. I asked John Swinney, given the questions over this fund in Holyrood on Thursday, whether he would apologise to those members who believed they were contributing to a ring-fenced indyref campaign fund. And here's what he said.
So will you apologise to those SNP members who believed that they were donating to a ring-fenced independence campaign fund and not contributing to the general party expenditure?
I think people know that when they give money to the Scottish National Party, they're giving money to the cause of Scottish independence, and I think that's a pretty well-established point in people's psyche about how they donate to the SNP.
But okay. Party officials wrote letters to members saying this, assuring them that this was ring-fenced.
Well, John, the Scottish National Party is a party that is committed to winning Scottish independence. So I think when people give money to the Scottish National Party, they would expect it to be used to win Scottish independence, which is why the party feels such hurt at the way in which we have been betrayed by one of our key officials who used money not for the purpose of winning Scottish independence, but for making a lot of purchases that were not appropriate. And our money is used to support the political agenda of the Scottish National Party, which is to win independence. Okay, thank you.
That was John Swinney speaking to journalists after First Minister's questions in Holyrood on Thursday. I mean, Andrew, on the face of it, this is pretty dishonest behaviour by the party of government, isn't it? To put it mildly. I mean, people were quite clear with those initial kind of crowdfunders that this was a ring-fenced fund, or a fund that was for the specific purpose. And you would not read that and understand it that those funds were then going to be used simply for general party business, the kind of general party campaigning.
Yeah, it's really, I don't think a lot of the people who donated to this, perhaps a lot of the people who aren't SNP members, they'll feel like they've been wronged here. There are people who believe in independence who aren't members of the party, or there are people who are members of the party who already give money but wanted it, for that specific cause. So it's quite crazy, really. I mean, it's kind of what we had thought had happened, wasn't it? Because we've obviously seen what the party accounts have been like, and there's not even £600,000 in it at different points. So we know that's where the money had been used on. Expenses within the party used for election campaigning. So it's quite a crazy sort of thing, and it does make you think. Look, if this had happened before the election, would it have made any difference if people had been told? It might have. The only thing I can really think it would have made a difference would be that SNP supporters wouldn't get out as much. It might have motivated people to come out against the SNP, but I really think probably at the election, the main deciding thing was that people weren't convinced by Labour rather than what they thought of the SNP and what they thought of this. So, in my opinion, it probably wouldn't have made that much difference. But it's a crazy, crazy scenario where people have donated for a cause and it's not gone towards it. But I think that's the crux of the thing here, is that in a way the SNP get away with it in terms of public opinion. We saw it at the election just there, even though we hadn't had the guilty plea yet, because people believe so fervently in the cause of Scottish independence and that Scotland should break away from the UK. And essentially they've taken advantage of that, and the people who donated to this fund have been taken advantage of because the party wasn't honest with them. And really they should add a caveat: if we don't get a second independence referendum, we'll be using it for this. But of course that would be admitting that there was a chance that there would be no second independence referendum, which they wouldn't want to do. But it's madness, and it's kind of unlike anything we've seen in Scottish politics before, I think.
Catriona, what do you make of this? I mean, John Swinney today is saying that, the SNP came out and basically said this in 2021. I think it was through a statement that Colin Beattie, the former treasurer, made, where they, came out and said effectively that the money had been used for other purposes. But at that time, they were saying that an equivalent sum would be used for any kind of future independence referendum. But it is hard to get away from the idea that this is just completely dishonest.
Yeah, not illegal, not crossing any kind of illegality boundaries, but fundamentally dishonest. And it is astonishing to keep hearing John Swinney and other senior SNP MSPs say, well, we're a party that just campaigns constantly. So when we said that we were going to use this money for a campaign, that's what we've done. It's so weaselly. It is very clearly two completely different scenarios. But if you're the SNP and you have been in power for as long as they have been in power, and almost nothing seems to meaningfully damage their popularity. Yes, at the Holyrood election, their vote share was down. They have fewer MSPs than they did in the last Parliament. But ultimately, they're sort of at the point where it seems like they feel like they can just do what they want and get away with what they want, and it doesn't really matter. And I think it is insulting to people who donated. It is insulting to voters that they can use this kind of weaselly framing of the situation to not even excuse what's happened to this money, because they're not trying to excuse it. They are just saying, this is the situation, this is what's happened, and you can just like it or lump it. We're going to get on with whatever we're getting on with and hope that this all blows over. I think it's pretty bad comms. I think, as I say, it is offensive to everyone who's listening to these lines and is being expected to believe them. But why would they do anything different? Because they must feel like they're completely untouchable at this point.
And probably just to give credit where it's due, these issues were kind of raised repeatedly by Wings Over Scotland, and some of this stuff is now kind of hitting the headlines again, obviously in the aftermath of Peter Murrell pleading guilty. But do we think there is going to be an inquiry, or do we think this issue will be allowed to sort of blow over or slip away from focus?
I think there will be at least a Westminster inquiry, because I think if 10 of the 11 members of the Scottish Affairs Committee want an inquiry, they'll make it happen. And also I think they'll all be under a bit of pressure from their Scottish political party leaders to do so. So yeah, I think they will. And it's really profile raising as well for all these MPs if they want to do it. So I think it's a great opportunity for them.
Andrew, I totally hear what you're saying, but that is just so bleakly depressing. Profile raising and great opportunity for them. I hate being asked to pin my colours to the mast because I am invariably wrong 100% of the time. So, I think there should be an inquiry, because I think otherwise how do they move on from this? But I think that I'm so sceptical now about the functioning of Holyrood and the government and accountability that there is not, certainly up here, going to be an inquiry. I think the SNP will push against that as hard as they possibly can, and the Greens, the Scottish Greens, will likely back them. So if it's a numbers game, there is not going to be an inquiry up here, but possibly at Westminster. What about you? You have to also nail your colours to the mast if you're doing it.
I have similar kind of scepticism, to be honest. I think if it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen in Westminster. I think if it does happen there, it will be political theatre. There'll obviously be great lines out of it as far as journalists are concerned. You'd imagine that they'd have people like Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney giving evidence to that. But I don't know how they would have the power to, for example, kind of open the SNP books or really get to the bottom of what was happening. I just don't see how that would be something that the Scottish Affairs Committee, for example, could do. So I don't know if we would get to the end of that process with people satisfied that we've got all the answers that people are seeking. But why not have a bash? You might as well try. It's better than nothing. And I do, kind of similar to what you guys are saying, I do think there has to be something. There are just so many questions around this now that I think there's a kind of head of steam here, and there has to be some movement, or there should be anyway. But we will have to wait and see, and we'll be waiting only a few days really to see what the Scottish Affairs Committee is going to do next, from what you're saying, Andrew. But
yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, see, when I'm saying about the profile raising thing, there's something really significant to watch, which I think will be interesting, is one of the